The training dome projected a flawless blue sky above the assembled recruits. But Marcus Hale could see the seams in the illusion, its neat edges, its sterile brightness, its inability to mimic the taste of real dust in the air. The Galactic Defense Alliance favored spectacle over authenticity, as though war could be made polite through enough holograms. Rows of young soldiers from a dozen species stood shoulder to shoulder, each gripping a plasma rifle that hummed with restrained energy. Their confidence radiated more brightly than the projected sun, and Marcus recognized the dangerous naivete behind it. They believed technology guaranteed survival. They believed nothing built from metal and chemistry could matter anymore. The instructor, a tall, silver-shelled Varelian, gestured toward a sealed display case at the edge of the field. Inside rested a long, dark weapon of plain steel, its edges worn but dignified. "Observe the primitive human ballistic rifle," the instructor announced, voice reverberating like polished glass. An obsolete artifact from before humanity joined the Alliance. Inefficient, loud, and entirely dependent on explosive propellant. A ripple of laughter swept through the recruits. One crystalline cadet tapped the case with delicate fingers and recoiled theatrically. "It looks like a tool for crushing rocks, not fighting wars." Marcus stepped closer, though he stayed outside the circle of mockery. His boots left faint impressions in the simulated soil, a gesture the hologram almost failed to process. "It fought plenty of wars," he said, his voice steady but edged with something the recruits couldn't name. "And it did the job in conditions your rifles wouldn't last 30 seconds in." The instructor frowned at him. "Sergeant Hale, you were assigned here as a cultural liaison. Please restrict commentary to historical context." "That was historical context," Marcus replied, folding his arms across his chest. His gaze never left the recruits, who now stared at him with a mix of curiosity and amused dismissal. He'd seen that expression before, right before green soldiers learned pain with brutal efficiency. To distract from the tension, the Varelian instructor pulled up a hovering projection of a desert world marked with swirling electromagnetic patterns. "Our next deployment is to Varus," he declared. "The Croth insurgents have taken advantage of the planet's atmospheric instability, but our technology will overcome such obstacles." Marcus suppressed a dry laugh. He studied the projection with a soldier's eye, noting the volatile winds, the shifting magnetic fields, the terrain that looked capable of swallowing entire squads. "Your tech won't last an hour down there," he muttered. A nearby recruit overheard him. "Are all humans this pessimistic, or is it just you?" "Experience isn't pessimism," Marcus said. "It's realism." Commander Arel stepped forward, tall and severe, her armor shimmering with embedded circuitry. "Sergeant Hale," she said crisply, "your insights are appreciated, but our weapons have undergone rigorous testing. The Alliance does not rely on antiquated ballistic devices." "Maybe it should," Marcus answered. He gestured toward the display case. "That rifle doesn't need calibration, doesn't need energy cells, doesn't shut down when sand hits the vents or when the weather picks a fight with your shield frequency." The commander offered him a thin smile. "The galaxy has evolved beyond such crude simplicity." Marcus held her gaze without blinking. "War hasn't." Silence pressed down for a moment, and even the holographic breeze seemed to hesitate. The recruits exchanged uneasy looks, uncertain whether to laugh again or consider the possibility that the human might know something they didn't. Arel dismissed the dome's projections with a gesture. The sky dissolved into a grid of fading blue lines. "Deployment begins at dawn," she announced. "Prepare yourselves. The Croth will fall swiftly once we engage." Marcus watched the recruits disperse, their earlier laughter replaced by eager anticipation. They still believed the Alliance's weapons would save them. They still believed the universe respected sophistication. He lingered beside the old rifle, his reflection faint on the glass. The weapon seemed patient, almost expectant, as though it knew something the recruits did not. Marcus placed a hand on the case, letting the quiet weight of memory sharpen his thoughts. "Let's hope you're wrong about everything," he murmured, though he felt the creeping certainty that he wasn't. He walked toward the exit, carrying the uneasy knowledge that when Varys tested them, the Alliance's faith in elegance might shatter, and he would be the only one prepared for the break. The desert of Varys greeted the arriving battalion with a furnace blast of heat that seemed to claw straight through armor seals. Marcus Hale stepped off the shuttle behind the recruits and felt the familiar sting of airborne grit on his face, the first honest sensation he had experienced since joining the Alliance. Around him, aliens shuffled with uncertain steps, their luminous rifles humming with unfounded confidence. He watched their eyes sweep the horizon as if expecting the planet to congratulate them for showing up. Varys offered no such courtesy. It only waited to break them. Within minutes of a landing, the first warning signs emerged. A sudden magnetic ripple rolled across the dunes like an invisible wave, rattling every piece of advanced equipment. The crystalline officer from training lifted his rifle and frowned as the coils flickered. "Minor instability," he said, tapping the side panel. "The calibration system will compensate." Marcus didn't bother responding. He simply watched the rifle's glow die as if snuffed by an unseen hand. The officer stared at it, confused rather than afraid, as though malfunctions were a theoretical inconvenience rather than a battlefield reality. More ripples followed, stronger each time, until the entire platoon found themselves surrounded by the sound of energy cells whining in protest. A scout vehicle attempted to activate its sensor array, and the dome collapsed into sparks. The driver cursed, slapping at the control panel with growing panic. The dunes answered with a distant series of metallic pops. Marcus recognized gunfire before any of the others. To them, the sound was alien, too crude, too physical, too undeniably real. "Cover!" Marcus shouted, grabbing the nearest recruit and dragging him behind a ridge. The aliens hesitated, their instincts shaped by sterile simulations rather than survival. Then the first slug whistled past, punching a fist-sized crater into the sand, and they scrambled after him. Shapes moved along the horizon, lean figures with dark armor and simple, brutal rifles that spat metal rather than light. The Croth attacked with confidence, knowing every electromagnetic surge rendered Alliance weapons ornamental. Plasma rifles refused to charge. Antimatter carbines displayed cascading error codes. Shield belts collapsed into dead weight. The platoon was left holding silent toys, while their enemies advanced with relentless precision. Fear spread quickly. Some recruits tried to flee toward the shuttle, only to find its engines struggling against the planet's magnetic tantrums. Others shouted for tactical uplinks that no longer existed. The crystalline officer pressed every panel on his rifle until his hands trembled. Marcus took a breath, feeling the familiar shift inside himself. The quiet focus that came only in moments where survival depended on clarity, not pride. "Weapons down," he ordered. "We move low, stay behind cover, and don't waste time trying to resurrect junk that was never built for real war." The recruits looked at him as though he were the only fixed point in a collapsing world. He led them through a jagged ravine, keeping them beneath the path of incoming fire. The Croth did not pursue immediately. They didn't need to. They knew environmental warfare would do the job for them. Inside the shelter of the ravine, Marcus knelt and examined the scorched dust on his glove. "This planet eats electronics," he said calmly. "Your guns were doomed before we landed." The crystalline officer's voice shook. "Then what do we fight with?" Marcus turned, his expression unreadable but steady. "With something that isn't afraid of sand, heat, or gravity. Something older than your doubts." He opened the crate he had insisted on bringing, the metal hinges groaning as though waking from a long sleep. Rows of brass gleamed within. A belt of cartridges curled like a sleeping serpent atop a weapon built of steel and certainty. The recruits stared, breathless, as Marcus rested his hand on the M249's receiver. Time to learn how real soldiers survive. The aliens regarded the weapon as though Marcus had unearthed a relic from a forgotten religion. The M249 lay across his lap, its steel frame absorbing the harsh light of Varys with a quiet, ominous confidence. The recruits leaned closer, unsure whether to admire it or recoil from it. The crystalline officer finally spoke, voice thin with disbelief. "You intend to fight the Croth with that? It has no energy core." "That's the point," Marcus said, threading the ammunition belt through the feed tray with practiced precision. "It doesn't need one. It only needs me, gravity, and chemistry that doesn't care if the sky is falling apart." A reptilian recruit clicked his jaw, signaling confusion. "But it is loud, crude, unrefined." Marcus locked the cover with a firm snap. "War isn't refined, and loud can be useful." A tremor rippled through the sand, followed by the distant percussion of Croth rifles testing their range. The aliens stiffened. Marcus felt their anxiety, the sense of helplessness that came from trusting weapons too delicate for the world that now threatened them. He rose to a crouch, set the saw's bipod into the sand, and scanned the ridge. "They'll scout before they strike. Stay close, and do exactly what I say." The recruits exchanged uneasy glances but obeyed. Their survival depended less on pride now and more on the steady authority in Marcus's voice. The crystalline officer positioned himself beside him, clutching his dead rifle as if hoping it would awaken out of sheer necessity. Minutes stretched tight. Then shadows appeared on the ridge. 2 Croth scouts, rifles slung low, confident in their dominance over a disabled enemy. Marcus inhaled, settling into the familiar tranquility that preceded action. He squeezed the trigger. The saw erupted with a mechanical roar that shattered the stillness like a beast freed from chains. Brass casings spat across the sand. A stream of metal cut through the ridge, forcing the Croth to dive in shock. The aliens beside Marcus flinched, overwhelmed by the ferocity of the weapon's cadence, but their eyes widened with something new. Hope. One scout tried to rise, only to be driven back by a second burst. The Croth retreated behind the ridge, abandoning their advance entirely. Marcus lifted his finger from the trigger and let the barrel cool naturally in the wind. He said nothing for a moment, letting the stunned recruits absorb what they had witnessed. The crystalline officer crouched beside the saw, awestruck. "It did not fail," he whispered. "The storm surged just now. I felt it, and still it fired." "That's because it's built to survive the world," Marcus replied. "Not pretend it doesn't exist." Another ripple of gunfire sounded in the distance, farther away now. Marcus recognized the pattern. The Croth were adjusting, evaluating a threat they had not expected. He knew they'd return in greater numbers soon. "We need more than one weapon," the reptilian recruit said, newfound determination steadying his voice. "Can you teach us?" Marcus studied their faces. Fear was still there, but fear with direction, fear willing to learn. "I'll teach you the basics, but you'll have to adapt. Ballistics isn't about elegance. It's about leverage, physics, and grit." He guided them through the mechanics. How to seat a belt, how to clear a jam, how to keep sand out of critical parts without relying on automated maintenance. Their alien hands, clawed, crystalline, soft, or scaled, found new motion in the discipline of practicality. What the saw demanded was not perfection, only commitment. As night approached, the recruits stood around Marcus in a loose defensive circle. The desert hummed with the promise of another attack, but they no longer felt abandoned. They had a weapon that worked, a mentor who understood survival, and a glimpse of a strategy rooted not in spectacle, but in realism. The crystalline officer rested his hand gently on the ammo belt. "Sergeant Hale, what do we do when the Croth return in force?" Marcus checked the horizon, eyes narrowing as he spotted movement far beyond the dunes. "We do what soldiers always do," he said quietly. "We hold the line until they learn fear." The recruits tightened their formation, readying for the coming storm. The desert wind carried the scent of conflict, but for the first time since landing, they felt prepared to meet it. The night on Varus settled like a shroud of cooling ash, dimming the dunes without muting the tension coiled within the small defensive circle Marcus had shaped from frightened recruits only hours earlier. Now they crouched behind makeshift berms of sand and scrap metal, their postures steadier, their breaths more controlled. The M249 rested at the center of the position, its barrel glinting faintly in the moonlight, as if eager, for what approached. Marcus checked the weapon with the casual thoroughness of a man greeting an old friend. The crystalline officer knelt beside him, clutching a crude ballistic carbine the squad had assembled from scavenged plating and mechanical springs. It was bulky and uneven, but when he had test-fired it earlier, it hadn't jammed. That alone made it superior to every plasma weapon the Alliance had carried here. "They're coming," he murmured, voice trembling in resonance. Marcus tilted his head, listening. The Croth moved with predatory confidence, their footwork deliberate, their rifles clicking with mechanical certainty. He felt the faint vibrations through the sand before the aliens behind him even realized they were being surrounded. "Good," Marcus said softly. "Let them think we're as helpless as before." The first wave crested the dune, dozens of silhouettes framed against the starlit ridge. Croth rifles angled down, expecting panic. They did not expect the staccato thunder that erupted when Marcus squeezed the trigger. The SAW unleashed a punishing arc of fire, shredding the ridge and sending shards of rock and fleeing silhouettes scattering into the shadows. The recruits flinched only for an instant before rallying, their improvised carbines and slug throwers answering the machine gun's roar with proud, uneven bursts. The ambush forced the Croth to fall back, recalculating their advantage. But the desert no longer belonged to them. It belonged to whoever could fight in its chaos without pleading for technology to compensate. The crystalline officer fired again, the recoil jarring his entire frame, yet determination steadied him. "Sergeant Hale," he said between gritted crystalline plates, "I believe I understand why your species survived so many wars." "Because we don't expect the world to be kind," Marcus replied, sweeping another burst across the flank of the approaching enemy. "We expect it to try killing us, and we build from that assumption." The Croth regrouped quickly, sending a second wave down both sides of the ravine. Their strategy was sound. Overwhelm with numbers and force the defenders into close quarters. Marcus recognized the shift even before the shadows deepened along the ravine walls. "Shift left," he commanded. "Keep the angles tight. Make them come to you." The recruits obeyed instantly. Their earlier fear transformed into fierce focus. Sand kicked into the air as Croth warriors charged down the slope. The reptilian recruit fired point-blank at an advancing Croth, the crude weapon bruising his shoulder but dropping the enemy with a satisfying thud. Surprise flickered across his scaled face, surprise that he, once helpless, could now stand against a trained warrior. Marcus pivoted the SAW toward the narrowing choke point, anchoring the entire defense with relentless suppressive fire. The belt rattled through the receiver, each round a testament to the weapon's enduring purpose. The Croth faltered, hesitating as their armor, designed to deflect plasma, absorbed the blunt force of physical rounds it had never been engineered to resist. Another wave broke, and another. Each collapse chipped away at the Croth's certainty. They came expecting fragile prey. Instead, they found determined defenders with weapons that refused to bow to the storm. When the final group retreated beyond the dunes, leaving the battlefield littered with silence and settling dust, Marcus released the trigger and exhaled. The barrel steamed gently in the cooling night. The crystalline officer looked at him with a mixture of reverence and exhaustion. "We held," he whispered. "Against all logic, we held." "No," Marcus corrected quietly. "We adapted. That's what survival really is." The recruits gathered around the SAW as though it were a symbol forged from their own transformation. Their armor was dented, their makeshift guns charred, but their spirits no longer trembled. As dawn crept over the dunes, flickering orange across the battlefield, Marcus rose and slung the empty SAW across his back. The recruits straightened beside him, awaiting instruction not with fear but with conviction. "We're not done," Marcus said, gazing toward the horizon where the Croth would regroup. "But now they know we're not afraid of fighting dirty. And that changes everything." The desert wind carried his words forward, scattering them like brass across the sands of Varus, an omen of the battles yet to come.